Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Samantha Johnston. I'm the Executive Director and Curator at Colorado Photographic Arts Center. And thanks for joining us for our panel discussion for our current exhibition, Sites of Memory. We are a nonprofit photography center, and if you are in the Denver metro area, we hope you can stop by to see this powerful exhibition. A huge thank you to SCFD, the Bumpy Stanton Foundation, WC and EJ Thornton Foundation, and the Denver Public Library for the support of this exhibition. And this exhibition was inspired by The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, which is the 2026 selection for One Book, One Denver, which is a city-wide literary initiative led by the Denver Public Library. And the novel is based on real events at a reform school in Florida and explores themes of injustice, friendship, trauma, and the lasting impact of violence. And drawing from those themes of The Nickel Boys, the exhibition Sites of Memory examines how trauma is embedded in places and carried across generations through portraiture and landscape. These four artists map emotional and historical terrains where memory resists disappearance and the past remains urgently present. And we are going to have each artist give a little bit about their work, and then we have some group questions. And then we'll have time for a Q&A as well, and people are welcome to you can raise your hand and I can unmute you later for questions, or you're welcome to put them in the chat or the Q&A and I will monitor that. So I am going to share my screen, and Harlan, I'm gonna have you just kind of introduce. I have a question for you too, but I'm gonna have you kind of get started and I'll pull up about your images. So just give me 1 second. All right.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being in attendance. I'm Harlan Bozeman. I live in New Orleans, Louisiana, as of last August, so I'm very new here. But for the last 6 years, I've been making work in the Arkansas Delta in the small town called Elaine, Arkansas, that is in Phillips County. The work that's featured in Sites of Memory is from an ongoing project from the last 6 years, titled Out the E. It started off with a simple line of inquiry around what is this place like today? I originally found out about the history of Elaine, Arkansas, along with the Red Summer of 1919, back in 2020. And it was this very specific summer where you had examples of racial violence all throughout the country. And one of the worst examples of this violence, in terms of lives lost, was in Elaine, Arkansas, which today is a town, really small town of around 500 people. And so finding out about this place, knowing that I was living in Arkansas at the time, I was starting graduate school that was on Zoom because of COVID. I really took advantage and wanted to see what this place was like today. And before that, I spent about a couple months doing some research, just seeing what I could find around Elaine. And I couldn't find anything really, no photographs, no documents. Around centered on this town besides what happened in 1919, as if this town's history and legacy started and ended in 1919. And so I knew pretty quickly that the only way I was going to figure out what this place was like today was from going down there. And there was not much of an agenda. For my first visit down there in September of 2020, I'm working with large format and medium format film. And then I'm also bringing my digital camera. And so since that very first initial visit, I've been surrounded by these young adults. At the time they were kids, now they're young adults. And it was a very simple exchange. I gave them the digital camera and I began shooting film. And it started off that way, and then it turned into these photo camps. And really, I was just doing this as a way of having this consistent engagement, given that I was living 5 hours away. But it took me a couple years to understand what this work was about, what this project was going to turn into. I recognized that I found out about this place because of its tragic past, but I wasn't interested in making work around that. I was interested to understand how people in this town felt around its history, and it goes both ways. There's people who don't want to talk about it. There's people who feel the sense that they need to. And then there's also people in Elaine that don't think the massacre even happened or it was heavily embellished. And so this is a very racially charged place. I don't say that lightly. It is just as racially segregated as it was in 1919 as it is now. Some would say even worse. And it's right along Main Street. You yourself could be in Elaine and you could be there for like less than 10 minutes and feel that segregation. It's pretty evident. And so really, after about around a couple of years making work there, I was finding out new information every year. For the longest time, I was talking about this work as if it would exist in the Civil Rights Museum that they were constructing. And then in the summer of 2023, I found out that wasn't going to be happening. And I basically had to pivot for the last 3 years around how I envision this work, not only existing within this town and then in them retaining some ownership of the work itself, but how can I use this work to try to improve the material conditions of these people's lives? And I don't think the work itself or even me is like, I'm not capable of doing that. I'm just one person. However, um, there are some things that I'm interested in. And so in the last year, I'd say Out the E has been less about photography. I still will return. I was just there back in July. I'm try to be there frequently, even though I'm like 6 hours away. But a lot of these kids who I met in 2020 or 2021, and they were making their own digital pictures, they were editing, they were printing their own work. Not super often, but only during the summers. And they're older now. They're like young adults. They're like 18, 19, and I met them when they were very young. And so now comes this like kind of second half of the project where I'm interested in seeing what these young people do. It's a big question mark around if a town like Elaine would be around in 50 years. That's why when I think back to the Civil Rights Museum, I was very bummed when I found out it wasn't going to be happening. It was as if something I was talking about for years just kind of deflated or overnight, all from like mismanagement of funds that I won't waste all of your time getting into. But um, I thought, what would it mean to even have a museum in a place where you could not move to? Like there's no housing in a place like Elaine, and you can't drink the water in Elaine. The infrastructure is terrible. What would it mean to create a civil rights museum in a place that doesn't have enough resources for its residents? And so in the last couple of years, Elaine has shifted. They've recently, not recently, in the last 2 years, elected their first black, first female mayor, Mayor Hicks, who is a direct descendant of one of the members of the Elaine 12. And the Elaine 12 are 12 black men who were put onto death row after the massacre, also turned into a landmark court case. But I will say for the first time in this town's history, it's being directed and led by somebody who has a direct relationship with this place. And so in the last couple of years, her and I have been engaging on how we think this work could exist and also benefit this town. Um, I'm excited to say that my first publication of this work, titled Out the E, will be out in October. We're doing a book release in Elaine. We're really excited about it. But we're also, the book is great. All of that is great. But I'm interested in seeing what's possible with a little bit of money. I don't want to say like produce some sort of change, but I think once I found out that the Civil Rights Museum wasn't happening, I was thinking about like what's something like sustainable that this town actually needs. And I was thinking about like a laundromat, and I was thinking about like some community space where people could gather. The majority of the work of Out the E is all outside. And that's not to say I don't go inside people's homes and photograph. One of the images in the show is someone's living room, Miss Fiore's living room. Um, but it's a private space, and I'm not always interested in photographing inside, but there's also not really a gathering place for people that is inside. That doesn't exist in a place like Elaine. There's no fresh food in Elaine. There's no grocery store. It's very much like a food desert that you have to make like an hour round trip to get a lot of your basic needs. Um, and so really thinking about how can I use my photographs, really, like these direct objects, these prints, um, to do something to change this town. And for me, that the simplest way that I've thought about it is creating an endowment that just flows in perpetuity. And so that's something that the mayor and I have been talking about for well over 3 months now. And I've been talking to other people who are not even affiliated with the Elaine or the American South, more like arts organizers around like what would it look like to create an endowment from a photo project that could hopefully last well beyond that will last well beyond like my lifetime. Um, and I say all that to say that it's very much it's more than an idea, but it's something that I hope to actually like start in the next year, which comes with a lot of bureaucratic institutional stuff, like starting a nonprofit and like doing the 501(c)(3) and like doing all these things I don't know about as an artist. But that's where this project has led. But for the longest time, I would say for at least the last 5 years, it's just been a photo project. And I'm hoping to extend that into something beyond art making.
Awesome. Thank you, Harlan. Taylor, I'm gonna have you jump in and talk a little bit about your work. Harlan, you kind of answered the question I had already, so Taylor, you can jump on in and talk about your series.
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. My name is Taylor Edgerton. My work is based in my hometown of Metter, Georgia. It's about an hour from Savannah. If you know where that is, if you know where Atlanta is, it's about 3 hours south of Atlanta. I started this work in my undergrad. I went to school at Savannah College of Art and Design, but on the Atlanta campus. So I was taking 3 hour drives back and forth to my hometown to create this work starting in 2022. Got my undergrad in 2023 and went back and got my master's in photography, and finished the summer of last year, actually. So this is a bit of an ongoing project. Um, is kind of expanded, but I will say the work is based around my family. In short, I found out in 2022 that my family is one of the few Black families that still own land within the city limits of Metter, which is forever growing to this day. Like we're still just now putting like Domino's, pizzas, and all these good restaurants around here. When years ago it was literally nothing in town. Like to this day, it's like two to three red lights. It's one school system, one grocery store. Um, but in short, it was super important to me to photograph my family, but also learn the history of how we got to this land, how we got to this place. And there's a whole deep dive in my written thesis of how we migrated to Metter and built this land that I'm speaking about in these images, literally from the ground up. Um, so within the work is pictures of my family, mainly my grandmother and her sisters, some of the oldest relatives of our family, which is the Whitakers. And it literally started from this image of the book under the pew. And that's how the title came about as well. We're a Baptist family. So I remember seeing this book literally under this pew, and I took this picture, and it became a staple in a way. But it also became a metaphor for my family as well. Just understanding how this book is kind of under this pew and kind of holding it upright and understanding that like my family has stories and books written that have been untold but literally have been kept between themselves or maybe not told at all to keep our family upright. So yeah, in short, every image is literally either a tradition of food, um, a staple or a metaphor for the church, for the matriarch. um, but yeah, it's literally just a journey of how we made it as a family to this day. But yeah, it's a brief of it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Justin.
Hello. I'm Justin. So my work is it's really in its infancy. It's in its beginning stages here. I started maybe like tail end of 2023, beginning of 2024, but kind of have to travel a lot for this. And so, it's kind of accumulating very slowly over time. But the work itself I'm really trying to dig into my family history and understand how trauma has been passed down through generations. And I'm approaching that in a kind of a different way of instead of focusing on the people specifically, well, because the people, have passed, they're not here anymore. I'm going back to places where my family's lived over generations and photographing the places that maybe were very important to the history, or places that there's a lot of places where homes no longer exist, and so it's just land, and going and taking photos. I'm because it's in its infancy, I'm kind of like straddling the fence on, do I take pictures of people now, which is that image you see in the middle is of my Aunt Sonia. She actually just recently passed. Uh, but do I take pictures of people now, or do I only keep it toward the landscape? And I'm really leaning of a mix of both. But there's what I found out in, well, the way that this project started was I had a conversation with my cousin, and my cousin was like, "Did you know that we were related to one of the oldest documented African American families? Their name is the Quanders." I was like, "No, I did not know that." And he was like, "You should start a project. You should do a project." And here we are starting the project. And I'm trying to figure out, the connection between me and that family, the Carneys and the Quanders, where the connection lies, where the connection split, um, and how, like, you know, we all fit into African American history, the Black diaspora, and what that means for my identity itself. Like all of these generations, how have they held me up? How have they shaped me? Whether that be the traumas, the joys, whatever it may be. Um, that is just a little bit. That's where my brain's kind of like stopping there. But it's a baby project. And so I'm really excited that it's, in the show, especially with it being in its infancy. Uh yeah, we're just starting. It's exciting.
Justin, can you also touch on the kind of the X-ray feel of the images?
Yes. Yeah. So I actually was my mom. Well, let's go all the way back. So, a lot of my work focuses on grief and death within my family. And that was born from the death of my grandmother. And she died of lung cancer. And my mom actually found her chest x ray, and she gave it to me. She was like, maybe you can do something with this in your art. And I didn't for maybe 3, 4 years or so, until I had this conversation with my cousin about this. Um, but it's visualized in this X-ray kind of aesthetic to really kind of present a questioning of what lies beneath the surface, right? An X-ray is meant to see beneath the surface what ails the body. Uh, and so with this being connected to trauma and like trauma through generations, what ails my family, right, is, or yeah, we'll leave it at that. What ails my family, and what's been passed down? What can't we see? What lies beneath the surface is is the reason for the kind of X-ray visualization.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then Letitia Huckaby, last but certainly not least, to give a little intro about your work.
Yes, thank you. I was so enjoying everyone else's talks. I forgot that I had to say something. Such powerful work. Yeah, thank you, everyone who's here. I'm honored to be in this exhibition. My name's Letitia. I'm based in Fort Worth, and the project that's in the exhibition is called A Tale of Two Greenwoods. Um, I was invited to create work in honor of the centennial for the Tulsa Race Massacre. And I've been working on descendant communities in freedmen's towns for a while. I started by documenting the land where my family's from and just kind of spread it out, was doing work um, in the Dust Bowl area and all around the South. So when I went to do this project, I was really interested originally in photographing the descendants of the original founding members of the town in Tulsa, the Greenwood district. And what I ran into was a lot of, I would call it generational trauma that had been passed down. This is 1921 when the race massacre happened, and I'm going down in 2021 to make this work. And it was shortly after, I believe Trump was going to be coming to the area for a political rally, and the media sort of descended on the community. And what I gathered was they were feeling very um, sensationalized by all the attention. Like they were the story, but not anybody giving back to the community. So they felt like taken advantage of and hurt. And so when I got there, I really did not want to contribute to that feeling that they were having. So I had to shift gears. And one of the things I found out, I actually grew up in a military family. My dad's last duty station was in Oklahoma. So I have a lot of connections to Oklahoma. Went to the University of Oklahoma for my first degree. So I had this connection. And what I found out while I was there is that the name Greenwood actually came from the fact that most of the founding members had migrated from Greenwood, Mississippi, which is where my dad was born and raised. So I had this like dual connection to these two Greenwoods, hence A Tale of Two Greenwoods. And I decided to make a comparison, a sort of visual poem between the two places where these diptychs on the left side is images that represent Greenwood, Mississippi, and on the right side are images that I took in Tulsa. So the Tulsa massacre desecrated a whole community. There's only one block left, and even that one block is divided by a highway. If you go there now, you can see that. So I photographed this residential street where all the houses were gone. There were just stairs left that should have led to homes. And I consider myself a documentary photographer, even though my work probably doesn't output like a traditional documentary photographer would. But it was very important to me, the truth of the situation. So when you look at the work, the the images are lined up as if you were walking down that street. So each staircase is in the place next to the next one it should be. And then for the part of the Mississippi images, I did two things. One, I scanned images that my father, that's him on the left, he's holding me. I'm a week old. I mentioned military baby, born in Germany. So he would take pictures, those old land photographs, the real thick card ones. If you're really young, you have no idea what I'm talking about, but they were hard photographs and you could write messages on the back. And he would write these letters to my grandmother in Mississippi. And I scanned the back and superimposed it over the front and printed out the image together so you can read the text and see the image. So I was a week old there. And then in the one next to it, I'm a little older, but we're still in Germany. And apparently I really loved the seesaw and would spend hours a day on the seesaw. So it also gave me a picture of like my father as a young father. He's deceased now. But the other part of that with the house there, I drove to southern Louisiana from Texas, picked up my mom, and drove up to Greenwood, Mississippi, and photographed the block where my dad grew up. By the time I was born, my grandmother had moved into a brick house. So I never saw this wooden house that my dad grew up in. And artistic gold, all the houses on that street were painted the exact same color. So you have two blocks that are being compared, and as you walk through it, you see all those houses, and there's one image with a mirror leaning in front of the house. That's the actual house where my father grew up. So it was bringing these communities back together after a traumatic event that um, separated them and also destroyed what was a very prosperous community, often referred to as Black Wall Street.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit too about the choice of the embroidery hoops? Uh, and
Yeah,
the
so
framing. I mean, I love that how it's organized as the diptych, but if you could share a little bit more about that.
sure. So when I was in graduate school, I lost my father right before I went to graduate school. And I had been printing on paper and I wanted to layer in some additional meaning and history into my work. And I decided because he was from Greenwood, and Greenwood was the fourth largest producer of cotton in the country. My grandmother's neighborhood was literally surrounded on three sides by cotton fields. I decided I was going to use cotton. So I started printing on cotton when I was in graduate school. And to this day, that's what my work is on. It's printed on cotton. I feel like it has a connection to African American history. And when you look at me and you think about cotton, it takes your mind immediately somewhere. So all of these images are printed on like a white cotton fabric. And then I framed these pieces in embroidery hoops because when a woman makes something for with an embroidery hoop, it's usually something for the home. It's something precious. It's not a dish towel. It's kind of like a quilt, right? And we probably all have something passed down through our family lineage that was embroidered by a grandmother or a great grandmother or an aunt. And it's a way of placemaking and homemaking. And so I love the idea of framing these images uh, about home in these embroidery hoops that usually relate to something precious, but we have this sort of like shift because the images, especially the ones with the stairs that lead to nowhere, are not precious.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna jump around a little bit. I mean, I had questions. I sent everybody questions before we got this started, but I'm gonna jump to some group. I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see everybody a little better. Um, as I talked about, the exhibition came out of, themes in the Nickel Boys. And you've all kind of touched on this a little bit, that photography is, it's often thought of as documentation proof that something happened, but all four of you are also working with absence, what's missing, what's buried, what's silenced. How do you, I mean, you've done it many in these images, but if you could talk a little bit more about photographing something that isn't there anymore. I think a lot about those stairwell. I can't stop looking at those staircases that go to nothing in your images, Letitia. Like, just if you could each kind of share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll go. Um, Sorry if I'm looking down. I have my notes here.
Good.
Because I thought these questions were very in depth and I love them. So, but in short, I feel like I was going to mention that I was reading something that it said photography is writing with light. And I can't remember where I pulled that from, but it stuck with me when I read the question because to me, like, I feel like when taking images, we are writing something in a visual way. And I think when we're talking about something that doesn't exist anymore, I think about my family in a way and how they are proof that something was there. And how what they say to me or the discussions we have or the history that we do have written down is proof that something was there, even though we can't see it. So, um, I mean, I've worked with old archival texts and writings, and I see people kind of pair those things with like their contemporary photographs. So I think, just in general, we have the proof that something existed, regardless of how we take the image. And I just thought, and I always think about how when I'm photographing now, it's a chance that what I'm photographing now may not exist in 50 years from now. So just always thinking in those ways. Um, yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll follow. I think for me, like especially when I'm working with landscape and these spaces, I mentioned going around to all these different freedmen's towns. Some of them, there's something left. There's a community left there. And some of them, there's nothing. Might be just a grave site that's left. But for me, there's always the history that's sort of embedded into that space. Um, so I'm always aware of someone else walked this land, someone else lived here, someone else tried to build a life here. So it's really loaded, even though it feels like it's empty or there's an absence of something, it still feels really heavy to me, those spaces. So, like the stairs that lead to nowhere, it still has a presence for me and a weight, just because of what I know about the history of the place.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think, it's a question that I ask while I'm photographing. My whole project is how do you photograph something that isn't there? Because a lot of my family history, the stories are lost, right? A lot of people have passed before I even started this project. And so I didn't even think to ask them the stories. Um, and for the Carney family, there's not a lot of records. And so it can be difficult to even find, exactly how far back the lineage goes or where exactly a house was, just because it wasn't recorded, or, you know, how streets have changed over time wasn't recorded. Uh, but yeah, how do you do it? I don't know, man. uh, the thing how I typically approach it is, I find these spaces and I go to these spaces, and oftentimes, similar to Letitia, I try to imagine, like, what were the relationships like? What were the people like who lived on this block? How did they walk up and down? How did they talk to each other? What did they say? Or for the people who lived in the houses, especially related to my family, what was that relationship like exactly? Was it joyous? Was it a joyous house? Was there turmoil? Was there, underlying issues of some kind that was passed down and that I see within my family today? Uh, what led to that? Um, and so oftentimes I walk up and down the block, and hopefully people aren't thinking that I'm crazy or trying something bad or anything, but I'll often just be there for a while to really try to feel it, to try to feel any residual whatever that may be left, that may be embedded within the land itself. Um, but yeah, I see my photos as questions, right? Instead of as document. It's a presentation of questioning, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there something you in specifically Full of Dreams? Because I feel like I've watched your work with Those Left Behind. I've seen, as you've talked about, that kind of thread of grief through your work, Justin. But in that kind of hidden beneath the surface, like, do you feel that something I know it's still a newer series, but like in Full of Dreams, is there one where you later were like, oh, this revealed itself to me after I, made this picture?
Yeah, and it's funny because it's related to the Quanders and not the Carnies, but something that I found out. It's not a picture that's in the show, but it's a picture on my website. It's a photograph of the slave memorial and cemetery at George Washington's Mount Vernon. I found out that one of the Quanders was a slave to George Washington. Her name was Nancy Quander. And interestingly enough, so she was there when his tomb was being built, and she cooked food for the men who built the tomb for George Washington. And it's really interesting. I didn't know that when I took the photo. Like, I don't have any photos of George Washington's tomb. I have to go back. But I found that out afterwards, and it's just really interesting that this structure that exists, that is important in American history. Uh, Someone who was related to me had a hand in helping make that, not physically, but without Nancy's food. Those people wouldn't have been well fed enough to do the work. So, it's just really interesting, very fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one.
Um, I I did not open up the PDF, so I did not see this question earlier. That's my fault. But we're answering off the cuff. I think that's something I've always found pretty difficult with this project specifically is I'm I'm aware of this town strictly because of a history that I'm not able to really see. But then I'm also thinking about like what are the ways that this specific tragedy has like trickled down into the present. And honestly, I think like if the massacre didn't happen in Elaine, something else would have happened. It would have been urban renewal, which is like the highway you could see going through Greenwood and Tulsa. It would have been some other thing. The plantation sharecropping system is still alive and well. It just looks different, right? The mayors in Phillips County like don't have control, right? Landowners do, and that changes access to food. It changes who pays what for property taxes. It changes a lot of different things. And so I think a lot about I think a lot about how the history lingers throughout the landscape, specifically like when I'm in Elaine, I do imagine, not even imagine, like I do consider that I'm in a huge graveyard. I believe there's bodies all around me because that's just what it was. They brought them out on trains and took them to Mississippi, but they also put a lot of people in ditches right in the town of Elaine. And so, I imagine kind of like negative things like that, but then I'm also thinking about what this place would be like, if that tragedy didn't happen. It's difficult, rumors and gossip created that massacre, which also created most of the other race massacres in this country, all from rumors and gossip. And that's all it really took to like bring in a bunch of people to kill and slaughter families. Um, and I think that energy of rumors and gossip, like physically traveling through spaces, still exists. The firsthand accounts I've heard from people in the last 6, 7 years, like a year before I was there, was the 100th anniversary in 1919, or I'm sorry, in 2019. And that's why that memorial is in the image or is in the show, Known and Unknown. It's the one memorial that they've ever built for that massacre, and it's not Any Lane. It's 35 minutes away, and there's no names on it whatsoever. It's just this black void, right? And no one understands why it exists 35 minutes away from the town that it happened in. And that's something that like it's like I think about all of these families who probably disappeared and left and never returned to Elaine. And then think about the people who have never left. And that's the majority of the people I'm photographing. They are descendants of people who never left Elaine. And so in a way, I think, there's absence from history, there's absence from people also through generational trauma, and then people just not knowing certain information. But I like to think that I'm also relying on people who are there presently to like clue me in on what's happening. Um, Even on like things that are happening in present day, but also things that happened like 30, 40 years ago. Like what was Elaine like in the 70s and the 80s? You're not going to know from looking on the internet. You won't. You have to go down there and speak to people. So I think that's a way that I try to photograph absence, or I try to photograph something that I don't have access to that's not there. There's certain images I can go through in archives and see from Elaine, but it's all centered around the massacre. And so I think a lot of it has to do with me imagining what this place was like during the civil rights movement, what this place was like during the 80s and 90s, really what this place was like before schools closed in 2005, because it was a different kind of place. Um, and luckily, there's people around in Elaine who can speak to that experience.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I think so important to have that document because here is a place where this major massacre happened and, it is not really in the forefront of um history, nationally. I feel like I wasn't super familiar myself either until I was like became aware of your work and was looking at the series and looking that up. So, um I think that's also part like to photograph in a town that has, not been visible. Great, thank you. And then another question that kind of is underlying in that same, but traumas passed across generations. It's a thread through all of your bodies of work. and it's, a thread throughout the book, in the boys that are in the school and the experience and how, that carries through to the end of the book. But whether it's a town, a family, or a neighborhood, do you see your camera as a tool for interrupting that cycle or simply for witnessing it? Is there a difference?
I'm not interested in I don't think I'm actively able to like interrupt generational trauma by making photographs in Elaine. I don't think that's happened. Um, maybe someone would disagree that what I'm doing is more than that, but I don't see it as that. I'm making pictures in a really, really small place. A lot of these kids and young adults, they have no idea what I do. They know what I do now, but the first 4 years, they were like, "You were just driving 5 hours each way to make photographs. What is wrong?" They thought I was like crazy, and I was weird, and I kept returning. Um, but I'm also not interested in just being an innocent bystander, just witnessing what's happening. Witnessing people not be able to get jobs because there's an influx of, South Africans who come and take everybody's work. That's happening all around the Arkansas, Mississippi Delta. I'm not just idly witnessing people not have access to fresh food. This is the lowest life expectancy for any county in the state of Arkansas. People pass away in their 60s in Elaine, and that's also common throughout like a lot of Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana. And so, you know, I'm I'm not changing those things with a camera. And so when I think of like generational trauma, um, I'm also not really seeing that as well. Like in the kids that I photograph and the kids that I'm hanging out alongside, and also the young people that are like below the age of 40, like I'm not seeing intergenerational trauma. But I also think that's something that like I might be able to even notice, right? I don't live there.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know what happens when I leave. I can't say that that's not there. I definitely have conversations with people that makes it pretty evident that like some people carry those things.
Yeah.
Um, but I like to believe for the most part, a lot of the young people, specifically like young people below the age of 18, aren't, yeah, I would like to think that they don't carry that, but I also know that trauma isn't necessarily something that you can always like identify within yourself. Like it might just be something that's inherently, there's a word I'm trying to say, but I feel like you know what I'm trying to
I
say,
do. Yeah.
that you just carry with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I like that word witness in your question. Uh, and I think the power that comes from a witness is the testimony,
Mhm.
right? If you testify, if you're a witness and you just look, then that's one thing. But if you speak up on behalf of whatever you've seen, and I think I see the work as a kind of testimony, an index or a document of what I saw, what I've noticed thus far with these communities. Like I also worked with Africatown in Alabama. It was a totally different feel, totally different feel. We had one community who was completely uh, destroyed, separated, annihilated, murdered. And we have a second community that their ancestors were enslaved 5 years before emancipation. And so they go on to build their own community, pass down traditions, know their history, stories of their ancestors, know who their ancestor was who came over on a slave ship, embrace their culture, and have what most African Americans want is some idea of where they came from, right? And they have a kind of the feeling in that community is much more positive, not to negate the negative that happened, but there's a sense of self to the point where they can give of themselves to others. They can say, hey, you're an African American, your history, my history is a reflection of your history. Look at what happened here, and you can see clearly what you don't know about specifically with your own lineage. And so being able to go into both those communities and say, look at this, and now look at that, and have that visual comparison for me, I think is really important. As far as any sort of change, I don't think that the work that I make is going to shift the course, but without going going into too much detail, I do uh, give back in a secret kind of way. I believe in that don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing mentality. And so I will not just go in and capture for these communities, but use whatever resources come to me to secretly give back to those communities.
Yeah, and I agree with both Letitia and Harlan. I kind of wrote down that personally because I'm dealing more so with family, and I guess you could say it's kind of easy to witness, I guess say witness my own experience of understanding their trauma. Obviously, this is a different year, different day and age. Not to say it didn't exist, but I guess it's just not in the forefront. And I guess with my work, I always tried to beautify that experience. You don't really see it in the work visually, but maybe in like my thesis writing, you can kind of hear the experiences or the traumatic things that my grandmother and her siblings had to go through. But personally, just to answer the question, I like to say that I'm witnessing it by documenting what exists in the now. So the family history, but also letting people and understanding people that have been in Metter for as long as my grandparents have. They didn't even know that we own this land still, or and I just say picking up the camera is kind of where the interruption occurs, I guess, because obviously you're kind of taking the photograph and then you're putting it in exhibition spaces. And then obviously, I feel like for me, just sending this work, not sending this work, but having this work in places that are not in Georgia kind of opened the conversation. I was getting questions at the exhibition that I have never heard before, because you're just getting a different interpretation of what the work means to other people. Um, and I just think it's super important that we are witnessing it, but also allowing for interruption, if that makes sense. Um, but I think that's what's super impactful for me about this work and getting it to Colorado and just hearing so many different insightful questions that I have never heard. Questions that I even brought back to my grandmother, literally, to ask her. Someone asked me about the highways and how that affected our family, and considering it's by Savannah and closer to Atlanta in a way too. So um, yeah, I believe my work is an interpretation of my experiencing of witnessing, and then whatever comes after that can be the interruption. But for me, I'm definitely witnessing more so than interrupting that cycle.
Yeah, it's I was trying to like figure out is it one or the other or what? I kind of see my work as in photography itself for me is really my way to understand. And maybe that's an interruption, right? Education. But it's really to understand how this trauma has affected my family through generations, how it's affected me, right, and the way that I was raised. Um, but I really see photography, even though it's about my family history, my personal family history, I don't feel like it's only about me, right? I see photography as a way of connecting with others. Um, and
Oh, did he freeze? We might have lost Justin. Well, we'll hope he comes
right.
back. There he is. Oh, you froze for a minute.
Oh, I froze. Where'd I freeze at?
Like 30 seconds ago, maybe.
What
Not that long, a couple seconds.
was the last
Talking
thing I
about
heard?
your family.
Okay. Um, well, so understanding my family, myself, but I see photography also as connecting to others. And gosh, now this is what happens when cameras freeze. Uh, but I want to understand how trauma forms us, but not only trauma, but as well as joy. Not just the bad, but the good also. Uh, but also how we persist beyond just trauma, right? Beyond the trauma. Um, but the reason why I share the work is really, I mean, the goal is always I want to, the word's not incentivize. It's a different word, but I'll just say incentivize. I want to incentivize others to, you know, take the plunge to understand themselves, to ask questions of their own histories, of their own family relationships, of, you know, greater histories, and see how it's formed them. Uh, and like I said, maybe that's an interruption, education. But yeah, I think more so it's an understanding, trying to come to an understanding.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. I also want to leave some time for questions. If there's any, please feel free to raise your hand if you're an attendee or put a question in. I just wanted to also thank all of like for the amazing work. This is our second year participating with the One Book One Denver program, and to be able to, kind of use a book as a tool to curate, to think about a different way to use that as a launching point. I really enjoyed the process last year, but again, this year, it's a very powerful book. And so to be able to kind of think about visually work that I felt was going to kind of tie back into those themes within the book was really powerful. And so thank you for making powerful work that uh, gives everybody a little bit more thought, makes people pause, and I think that's also the power of photography as well, that kind of moment to spend time with work and look at it. And especially in person, there's so much with the installation, with the size and the scale of the work that you only get a little bit from in the installation shots. So, wow, no questions. I really thought we might have a few. Oh, there's one. Okay. Um, Someone just asked, how do you handle the art and the loss? Did anyone have to step back or take breaks during the project?
I did.
So,
Sorry.
oh no, you can go. You can go.
I did during this project. I mentioned that my initial idea was to photograph the people. But once I got into the space, I realized how much weight the people were carrying. And I said I didn't want to add to that. So it really caused me to regroup and figure out how can I tell this story without sensationalizing them with all the projects I want to do, even though they're dealing with very heavy, often very negative histories. I want to do it in the most respectful way possible. I want the people to feel proud of the work that I've created about their community. I don't want them to feel like I've come in just for shock and awe, uh, kind of thing. And so that I did, this is the one project probably that really made me step back and look at it and say, okay, how can I do this? And so I ended up shifting and making it more about my history to the two places, you know.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I've been working with projects about grief within my personal family for about 10 years now. And I think for me, I don't notice that it's so heavy until you know, until the end, really. But really, what's the end? I feel like none of my projects are done. But yeah, I don't know. This might be like too much, but I'm kind of used to being depressed and sad. And so like I kind of just keep going and dig into it. I think what I try to do is express those emotions with the people who care about me and love me and who support me, uh, to really make it through. I've struggled with that before, when I first started like getting into this kind of work, but I've gotten much better at like just sharing that, and so I'm not so bogged down all the time. Uh, so that's been really important.
Nice. We had another question that for anyone was there consideration in camera or lens choice to best capture the intended story of the work?
I'll say I did majority of my work while in school, art school specifically. Again, I went to SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, and as a photo student, you had access to every camera. I wouldn't say for free. Obviously, you're paying for the tuition, but you had access to rent camera equipment. And obviously, my goal at the start of this project was not even book under the pew, because book under the pew became later in my MFA. So early when I started in 2022, I wasn't even thinking about where this could go. So at that time, of course, just being in school, I was checking out like a Mamiya, a RB, so going medium format. Uh, did a lot of work in large format because those were the classes that we had. You just had to do work on large format. So anytime I went home, I just kind of honed in on those skills and kind of not perfected, but obviously got better. And then as you kind of go, you just start taking images, and then sometimes you may not have access to either. So over time, I will say like all my work, everything on the wall and this whole entire series is a mix of film, medium, large format, um, digital, and it's really just trying to make it look cohesive in a print or in a frame or on a screen, in a presentation. All things that they kind of teach you in art school, especially at SCAD specifically. But yeah, I'm one of those people that doesn't get too caught up in what the camera or the lens. I'm more so just trying to take the image and make it make sense as far as what I'm trying to say.
Great.
Yeah, I'm not too specific about like camera and lenses. I shoot a wide range. I guess I don't shoot like wide lenses that often, but like I shoot pretty normal focal length sort of lenses. I love a 150 and a 180 on 4x5. Um, but I also love like really telephoto lenses. I can look super far and like I don't have to like walk across a field. Yeah, I guess like if I usually travel with like at least 4 to 5 lenses on me with my large format camera. So like depending on the type of image that I'm looking for, I know which lens I want to use. Granted, there is like the technical side of like using certain lenses with certain formats. Like there might be like vignetting, but that's a whole other thing. But for the most part, like I'm usually keeping like a 180 millimeter lens on my 4x5, which is probably an equivalent of like maybe like 60 millimeters or something like that. I could be wrong if people can do that math better than I can. But it's somewhere around there. Yeah.
I will say for this particular project, this is probably the only project where I have heavily considered like camera and not lens, but uh, really camera and print. Well, not well. Okay, I'll explain. So, I knew from the beginning that I wanted to make the images look like an X-ray, right? Because I had my grandmother's chest X-ray, and so that was the aesthetic that I immediately wanted. Uh, and I had started off shooting on large format, and at first I was just shooting normal large format 4x5 film, black and white, a couple of color. And then I found that, they actually make X-ray film that you can just shoot. And so I started doing that, and I developed it, but I wanted the image to be gigantic. And so, like, X-ray film 4x5 is tiny. It's 4x5. I want I want the images to be, I mean, they're not even the size that I want them to be in the show, right? I want them to be like 40 by 60. Uh, and so there's a limitation there. I can't shoot 40 by 60 X-ray film. I have absolutely no idea how much that would cost. And so I've had to rely on digital, right, to make that happen, just because it's more cost effective for me, the work and the traveling that I have to do. Yeah.
I don't really match my camera to my projects. My camera is more about, like, it's gonna sound cliche, but more about an extension of me kind of thing. And I really love, I shoot like a street photographer, even if I'm doing something that feels studio portrait-like. So I have a couple like rangefinder-esque cameras, one digital Leica and a Sony, and they're small. I love a 28-35 kind of lens. Um, so that's what I generally use. I like to move kind of quietly and light through spaces. So um, I think the camera is more about being a part of me than it is, what's going on with the project, and that's kind of where I live.
Awesome. Thank you. And we just had one other question. Susan asked, I think it was you, Justin, who is pondering making photographs of people for his series. I wonder what might help you decide to make those images. When I look back in my own photo practice, there were times when I did not do something I was thinking about, and now I understand how what I did not do would have filled in a few gaps. Now, if I can manage to make those images that I am not sure about, I just do it. I hope you can find a way to capture the people. So I guess the question is, how will you decide?
I mean, you said it, right? Like I'm just gonna do it. Uh, and the decision of whether to include it or not comes after, right? Um, like so just to give an example, so when I first started shooting for the project and visiting a neighborhood in Baltimore that um we used to live, um I woke up at like super early morning. I knew nobody was going to be out on the street, and I took pictures then. And my uncle passed away during the beginning of this project, starting this project, and I took pictures at his funeral, and I, converted those to that kind of X-ray look. And it was amazing, right? Like there was just so much feeling within that visualization. I was just like, I need to take pictures of people. And so I honestly think that I'm going to go back to a lot of spaces multiple times to get people walking up and down the street, or, different times of the day, of course. Uh, yeah, I'm just going to do
That's great. Uh, this is for anyone. How do you build a relationship with your subjects before you take their photos? And do those interactions impact how you end up taking their photo? Harlan, you talked a little bit about this at the start, but
Um, I built a lot of my relationship from honestly hanging out. There are many times I made the 5 hour drive to Elaine and my camera stays in the car. There are sometimes I forgot my camera and we are just hanging out. And I think doing that for months and months and months, and it's turned into 6 years, I think that helps. But also like it definitely builds the relationship, but like when you return after a couple months and like you give someone a print, you show them your work and they're like, that's my cousin, that's my daughter. And then it's like, okay, great, have their print. And then you get to make another photo. People open up a lot more when they get to see prints of themselves. There's nowhere near Elaine you could go get a print, right? You couldn't even buy a frame near there if you wanted to. So like I think that helps. I think that goes a long way, just like that simple exchange. Um, but I think the interactions that have helped me build the relationships the best are really having long conversations with people before a photograph is even made. And then I also do a lot of candid photographs, like even on the 4x5. Like I will set up my shot that I know that I want to do, and then I will be in a conversation feet away, and then like I'll have my shutter cable and I'll look over and then I'll make the image without them ever knowing it. Sometimes that happens, but then they end up seeing the print and they're like, "How did you do that?" Because they know that like it's a very slow process, the large format. They got to be still and like then they can't see it, which preteens and teenagers hate that they can't see their image. Um, yeah, I think that helped a lot, but I think the first and second, yeah, the photo camps that I did in the summer of 2021 and 2022 when they got to see me like consecutive days during the summer and be with me all day during the summer. Was helpful. But that relationship ebbs and flows. I'm the furthest I've ever been away from Elan. I'm 6 hours away. So um, it's different. These kids are also a lot older. But I would say like my relationship with most of the adults has like been a lot easier to maintain. Kids that I met when they were 13 are like 19 now, and they're like way too cool for me. So yeah.
Anyone else? No pressure.
Spending time.
Um, oh,
Go
sorry,
Spending
ahead.
y'all.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. I try to go and stay there for a while. And usually I've made a connection before I even get there that helps to introduce me to the community. But I work slow too, so I think that helps. Like Harlan was saying, he just engaging with individuals and occasionally make an image. I've run into a couple situations where people were like, "What are you doing? I don't want to be a part of this." And I'm just like, "Okay, it's fine. You don't have to do it if you don't want to do it." And if I'm there long enough and they get a sense of who I am, they might change. They've changed their mind. We'll come back later and say, "Okay, I think I'll do this." So it's just a matter of them seeing your intentions and the work that you're doing and that you're really vested and interested in who they are and their community that has really helped me.
Yeah, and I was just gonna add, obviously I'm taking photographs of family, so it's a bit of a different exchange, a little bit easier of an exchange. Especially now that I've kind of branched out side of family within after doing this project. But I'll say like right now to kind of answer that question, I've been doing a lot of work within the local school system. I do a lot of the sports photography. A lot of parents pay me to take pictures of their kids in the action of the sport, but I've also been given permission to actually make a project with these kids and obviously get parent permission, written permission to do portraits of these kids. So like I'm literally setting up a curtain and grabbing like a 4x5 or a medium format. And just kind of to piggyback off of Harlan, um, it's a bit of a different exchange when you have a medium format versus a 4x5, because 4x5 you usually have it on a tripod, and then people are like, well, what is this, kind of like this old fashioned camera? I'm like, yeah, it kind of is. And then as people kind of see the process and how slow it is, but also how expensive the film is, so you can't really rush it. At least I don't. So it's just a bit of a different reaction when you're photographing people, especially with something like film. And I love 4x5 enough to slow down and actually make a good portrait. So again, like Harlan, I'm having conversations with, again, these kids that really just want their photograph taken, but also are curious about what you're going to do with it afterwards or where it can go. Can it go in an exhibition? Will they see themselves in a book or a publication? Which I have had some kids really excited about. So yeah, it's really just going back and just doing it over and over and getting them used to the camera, but also again, like Harlan said, showing them what you're doing to build that trust and let them know you're not just holding photographs of them. Just kind of showing them proof that you're being honest with what you're doing and your intentions.
This is a little bit of a different perspective, not really taking photos of people, but just building relationships in general. Uh, just So my project is, I'm taking pictures of landscape, of places where my family's lived before, and that takes a lot of research. And when I first traveled, I went to Fairfax, Virginia, and I had no idea what I was doing there. But I went to the library, and I walked in, I talked to the librarian, they asked if they could help me, and I definitely needed help. But I just showed excitement about like the project that I was doing. I told them what I found. I asked them, is there any other information that they could provide? Do they know anything about this kind of history? And librarians are so happy to help. It's a little awesome. It's really awesome. They were so excited. After I told them about my project, they were like, "Yeah, we're going to do a lot of research and we're going to get back to you." And so just keeping lines of communication open and just showing, your interest, your genuine interest in what you're doing, I think is always very important.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us, those of you on Zoom, and thank you to all the speakers. If you haven't visited the exhibition and you're in Colorado or in Denver, please come see it. It's up till September 19th. It's really fantastic, and thank you all for sharing more about the work, and hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye.
you all
Thank
so
you.
much. Really enjoyed it. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.